What if the Bible you were taught is only part of the story? Not because something was stolen from it in a single dramatic moment, but because something far more subtle happened. Something quieter, something that unfolded slowly across generations. Meaning was layered over meaning. Explanations hardened into assumptions. Traditions repeated themselves until repetition felt like truth. What if nothing was removed, but something was buried? Buried beneath certainty. Buried beneath authority. Buried beneath the confidence of people who sincerely believed they were protecting truth, even as they simplified it. What if the problem was never the scripture itself, but the confidence with which certain interpretations were passed down without ever being questioned? Because confidence is persuasive. Confidence feels safe. And confidence, when inherited, rarely asks for evidence. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. If you could sit across from the earliest readers of these texts, people who spoke the original languages, who lived inside the cultural logic that shaped these stories, would they recognize the way these scriptures are explained today? Or would they hear familiar words, carrying unfamiliar meanings? For most believers, faith does not begin with discovery. It begins with trust. Trust in parents who taught prayers before we could read. Trust in teachers who spoke with certainty.
Ow.
Trust in institutions that claim to protect sacred truth. And trust is not wrong. But trust, when never examined, slowly replaces understanding. At first, belief is learned, then it is inherited. And eventually it becomes an identity. At that point, questioning belief feels like questioning oneself. This is where the tension begins, because ancient scripture was never designed to remove tension. Ancient scriptures were not written to be simple. They were written in a world that valued memory over books, dialogue over lectures, and wisdom over certainty. These texts were composed in cultures that expected interpretation, disagreement, and reflection. Stories were not consumed. They were discussed. Ideas were not finalized. They were debated. Meaning was not handed down. It was wrestled with. The people who first encountered these stories did not sit quietly and accept them. They argued over them in homes, marketplaces, and synagogues. They asked questions that made teachers uncomfortable. They passed stories down orally, reshaping emphasis based on circumstance and audience. To them, scripture was alive. But somewhere along the way, wrestling became rebellion. At some point, the very act that once defined faith questioning was rebranded as danger. Curiosity became suspicion. Doubt became a moral failure. And once that shift occurred, interpretation froze. Today, we are not exposing conspiracies. We are uncovering patterns. We are exploring 8 deeply embedded ideas taught so confidently that they are rarely examined, that begin to unravel when viewed through ancient logic rather than modern tradition. These are not attacks on belief. They are invitations to think the way ancient readers once did. And we begin where nearly every theological system begins, with the fall of humanity. From childhood, many people are taught that the story of humanity begins with failure. That 2 people disobeyed a command, introduced sin into the world, and doomed every generation that followed. This single interpretation has shaped how millions understand human nature itself. According to this view, humanity is fundamentally broken, corrupt by default, morally compromised before choice even enters the picture. This belief does not merely describe theology. It shapes psychology. If you believe you are broken at the core, you relate to yourself with suspicion, distrust your desires, you fear your thoughts, see struggle not as growth, but as proof of failure. But ancient Hebrew thought did not define humanity this way. In the ancient world, stories were not written to assign guilt. They were written to explain reality, to describe transitions, to mark thresholds. The Eden narrative was never read as a crime report. It was read as a wisdom story. The word translated as knowledge in the story does not mean information or education. It refers to experiential awareness, the kind of knowing that comes only through lived encounter. The Hebrew concept describes discernment formed through experience, not facts learned from instruction. This matters because the tree was never magical. It did not inject evil into humanity. It represented moral independence. The moment humans ceased relying solely on instinct or command and began navigating consequence through choice. Ancient readers did not see this as humanity becoming evil. They saw it as humanity becoming conscious. Responsibility entered the world, and responsibility always carries weight. Pain followed not as punishment, but as reality. Work became difficult. Relationships became complex. Mortality became visible, not because God was offended, but because awareness brings burden. A child does not feel shame until awareness develops. A child does not fear consequence until understanding emerges. Growth is not comfortable. It is costly. So, ask yourself this question slowly. Why was responsibility reframed as corruption? Why did maturity become disobedience? Why did the moment humanity became capable of moral reasoning become labeled as the moment humanity fell? Because the answer reveals more about later theology than ancient belief. The reinterpretation did not happen in Eden. It happened centuries later, in theological systems that required a problem only they could solve. Inherited guilt creates dependence. If you are born broken, you must be fixed. If you are corrupt by nature, you must be controlled. If you cannot trust yourself, you must trust authority. This reinterpretation reshaped how generations understood themselves, not as evolving beings capable of wisdom, but as fallen creatures in constant need of correction. And that shift had consequences far beyond theology. It shaped parenting styles rooted in shame, educational systems built on obedience, religious structures sustained by fear. Identity itself was altered. Instead of asking, "How do I grow in wisdom?" people were taught to ask, "How do I avoid punishment?" Instead of responsibility, there was guilt. Instead of discernment, there was submission. Now pause here. Ask yourself whether this interpretation produces wisdom or dependency. Ask yourself whether it aligns with a God who creates conscious beings, or a system that requires compliance. Ancient readers did not see Eden as humanity's greatest failure. They saw it as humanity's beginning. And when that understanding was replaced, something essential was lost. It's not truth, but confidence in human capacity for wisdom. And that is only the beginning of the story we inherited. As the story of humanity was reshaped, so too was the image of God. Another belief quietly absorbed into modern faith is the idea that God is emotionally volatile. Angry one moment, merciful the next, regretful, jealous, reactive, watching closely, waiting for failure. This image dominates sermons, artwork, and everyday religious language. God is often described as if he experiences emotional swings similar to human rulers, pleased when obeyed, offended when challenged, furious when crossed. Yet ancient Hebrew language tells a very different story. The Hebrew scriptures were written in a world without abstract philosophical language. Ideas were expressed relationally, poetically, and metaphorically. Complex realities were explained through human experience, not because God was human, but because humans were limited. When ancient texts describe God as angry, they are not offering a psychological profile. They are describing consequence. In ancient thought, moral reality was woven into existence itself. Actions carried weight. Choices produced outcomes. To violate wisdom was to invite disorder. God's anger was a way of explaining what happens when humans collide with moral reality, not a description of divine mood. The language was functional, not literal. But over time, metaphor hardened. Poetry became a personality. Illustration became description. Relational language became assumed psychology. And slowly, God was reduced. Reduced to temperament. Reduced to reaction. Reduced to something humans could emotionally predict. Ask yourself why a limitless being was made emotionally limited. Ask yourself why divine consequence was transformed into divine temper. Because once God is emotionally volatile, fear becomes an effective tool. Fear silences curiosity. Fear discourages questioning. Fear makes obedience feel safer than understanding. A God of awe invites reflection. A God of fear demands compliance. And once fear takes root, interpretation no longer needs to make sense. It only needs to be enforced. This shift profoundly changed how people related to faith. Reverence became anxiety. Worship became performance. Relationships became appeasement. But ancient faith was not rooted in fear. It was rooted in awe. It was not terror. Awe is recognition of depth, of complexity, of mystery that invites humility rather than submission. When awe was replaced with fear, something essential was lost. Then, another idea quietly followed. The belief that faith requires silence, that questioning demonstrates weakness, that doubt is dangerous, that curiosity threatens belief. This belief would have shocked ancient communities. Ancient Jewish tradition encouraged debate as devotion. Students challenged teachers openly. Scripture was discussed publicly, sometimes aggressively. Disagreement was not a threat. It was a method. To argue about Scripture was to take it seriously. Even God was questioned. Abraham challenged divine justice, asking whether the innocent would suffer with the guilty. Moses argued against divine decisions and persuaded God to relent. Job demanded explanation and refused shallow answers. These figures were not punished for questioning. They were honored for it. They were remembered not for obedience, but for engagement. So when did curiosity become a threat? The shift occurred when belief became institutionalized. As religious communities grew, structure became necessary. Organization brought stability. Stability required authority. Authority required control. And control does not coexist easily with questioning. Interpretation began to serve power rather than wisdom. Debate destabilized hierarchy. Silence preserved it. Once belief was tied to structure, doubt became dangerous, not because it harmed faith, but because it threatened order. So doubt was reframed as moral failure. Questioning was labeled pride. Thinking independently was called rebellion. Silence became virtue. And once questioning is forbidden, interpretation freezes.
Ow.
The meaning of texts becomes fixed not because it is correct, but because it is protected. Alongside this shift came another powerful assumption. The belief that the Bible arrived as a perfectly unified, internally consistent document, speaking with one harmonized voice. Ancient readers never believed this. They understood Scripture as a collection, a library, conversation across centuries, texts written by different authors in different contexts, responding to different crises. They expected variation. They expected disagreement. They expected tension. Contradictions were not seen as errors, or seen as dialogue. One writer emphasized justice, another emphasized mercy. One spoke from suffering, another from power. Truth was not found by flattening differences, but by holding them together. Modern theology often treats this tension as a problem to be solved, rather than a wisdom to be explored. Differences are explained away. Contradictions are harmonized forcefully. Complexity is reduced. Ask yourself why complexity feels threatening. Because complexity requires humility. Certainty is easier to manage than wisdom. When belief systems promise certainty, they attract followers. When they demand discernment, they create thinkers. Institutions often prefer followers. So Scripture was reframed. Instead of an invitation into discernment, it became a manual. Instead of a conversation, it became a decree. Instead of wisdom literature, it became regulation. But ancient readers did not approach Scripture this way. They approached it as a mirror. A text that revealed as much about the reader as the message. Meaning was not extracted once and preserved forever. It was revisited, re-examined, reapplied, which brings us to another subtle transformation. The shift from understanding God as the ground of reality to understanding God as a ruler within reality. Ancient thought did not imagine God as a being competing with humans for authority. God was the source of order itself. Wisdom was alignment with that order. But when God was reframed as a ruler, religion began to mirror politics. Obedience became the goal. Law replaced wisdom. Punishment replaced consequence. And faith began to resemble governance rather than growth. This is why fear became central. This is why questioning was dangerous. This is why metaphor had to become literal. Because metaphor invites interpretation. Literalism enforces control. Now, pause and reflect. Ask yourself whether your image of God encourages curiosity or compliance. Ask yourself whether fear has ever brought you closer to understanding or simply kept you quiet. Ask yourself whether ancient faith rich in debate, poetry, and paradox would recognize modern certainty as wisdom or as convenience. Because when metaphor became literal, something ancient was lost. Not belief, but depth. And this shift sets the stage for one of the most powerful transformations in religious history, the movement of faith away from life and toward the afterlife. As belief systems grew more structured, something subtle but powerful began to shift. Faith, once rooted primarily in life, how to live wisely, justly, and responsibly, lowly drifted toward what happens after life ends. Today, for many believers, the afterlife is the central focus of faith. Heaven is the ultimate reward, is the ultimate threat. Entire systems of belief, morality, and identity are shaped around where one will spend eternity. But ancient Hebrew scripture speaks very little about the afterlife. This silence is not accidental. Early Hebrew thought was overwhelmingly concerned with life here and now. With community, justice, wisdom, and responsibility, the central question was not, where will I go when I die? But how should I live while I am alive? The ancient world did not see existence as a test for a future realm. Life itself was the arena of meaning. When death was mentioned, it was described simply. The dead went to Sheol, a shadowy, neutral state of stillness. Not a place of reward, not a place of punishment, not a fiery realm of torment. Sheol was not hell, it was the absence of life. This understanding shaped how ancient people approached morality. Right action was not motivated by fear of punishment after death, it was motivated by alignment with wisdom and the health of the community. Justice mattered because injustice destroyed societies. Compassion mattered because survival depended on cooperation. Wisdom mattered because ignorance led to ruin. There was no cosmic scoreboard tracking souls for eternal placement. To ask yourself when fear became more powerful than wisdom, the shift did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually, influenced by surrounding cultures. During periods of exile and empire, Hebrew thought encountered Persian ideas of cosmic dualism, forces of good and an evil locked in battle. Later, Greek philosophy introduced concepts of immortal souls and abstract eternal realms. Roman governance emphasized reward and punishment as tools of order. These ideas did not replace Hebrew thought immediately. They blended. Slowly, the idea emerged that justice delayed in life must be fulfilled after death. That suffering demanded compensation. That moral order required cosmic enforcement. These ideas made emotional sense in times of oppression. When injustice went unpunished, the promise of future reckoning offered hope. But hope slowly turned into fear. And fear became a tool. As afterlife's belief developed, morality shifted from wisdom-based to consequence-based. People were no longer encouraged primarily to understand why something was harmful. They were told what would happen if they disobeyed. Fear is efficient. Fear is memorable. Fear is controllable. A population motivated by fear is easier to guide than one motivated by understanding. Ask yourself why modern faith spends so much time describing punishment and so little time cultivating wisdom. Ask who benefits when belief focuses on escape rather than transformation. Because a faith obsessed with the afterlife often neglects the present world. Environmental responsibility, social justice, and personal growth can feel secondary when life is framed as a temporary trial. Ancient faith did not view life as disposable. Life was sacred because it was real. Then there's the question of language. Many modern beliefs about the afterlife rest on words whose meanings have shifted dramatically over time. Take the word hell. In ancient texts, multiple words were used, describing something different. Sheol referred to the grave, or the state of death. Gehenna referred to a physical valley associated with destruction and consequence. These were metaphors, not metaphysical realms of eternal torture. Over time, these terms were merged, flattened, and reinterpreted. A place became a destination. A metaphor became geography. A warning became a threat. The word eternal followed a similar path. In ancient usage, it often referred to quality or duration relative to context, not infinite time, as modern readers assume. Yet entire doctrines of endless punishment were built on this linguistic shift. This does not mean deception was deliberate. It means language is fragile. Fragile language should never carry absolute authority. When translation becomes theology, meaning narrows, another word that shifted dramatically is soul. Ancient Hebrew thought did not separate soul from body. The soul was the living being, as a whole, not an immortal essence trapped inside flesh. Greek philosophy introduced dualism, the idea that the soul is divine and the body is corrupt. This idea slowly influenced theological thinking, reshaping how people viewed death, salvation, and the self. Ask yourself why so many people feel disconnected from their own bodies in modern faith. Ask whether this separation reflects ancient belief or imported philosophy. As these ideas merged, faith increasingly became about securing a favorable afterlife rather than cultivating wisdom in this life. And once fear of punishment after death became central, authority gained leverage. If leaders could define who was saved and who was condemned, they could define loyalty. Behavior became transactional. Obedience promised reward. Dissent risked damnation. But ancient wisdom did not operate this way. The prophets did not warn people about hell. They warned about injustice. They spoke of consequences that would unfold within history: collapse, exile, suffering, not eternal torment. They believed that moral failure destroys societies from within, which raises a difficult question. If fear of hell was not central to ancient faith, why is it central now? Because fear is powerful. Because fear simplifies morality. Because fear keeps people listening. But fear also distorts relationship. A God who must threaten eternal punishment to secure obedience begins to resemble a ruler, not wisdom itself. Ancient faith did not need this threat, trusted that truth was compelling on its own. And when truth ceased to be enough, fear filled the gap. This transformation deeply affected how people understood salvation. Salvation became rescue from punishment rather than restoration to wisdom. The focus shifted from healing to escape. And with that shift, faith lost something essential: its grounding in life. The afterlife problem is not that belief in life beyond death exists. It is that this belief eclipsed everything else. When faith forgets life, it forgets why it exists. Which brings us to another transformation: how authority itself was reshaped as belief systems grew. Have you ever wondered how we got here? To a world where science and faith often seem like they re on opposite sides of a great divide? It wasn't always this way. For centuries, faith and reason were seen as two wings of the same bird, lifting humanity towards a deeper understanding of the universe and our place in it. Let's journey back in time and explore the incredible transformation of this relationship. In the ancient world, thinkers like Plato and Aristotle laid the groundwork for Western philosophy. They used logic and observation to explore the nature of reality, ethics, and the soul. Their ideas weren't seen as anti-religious. In fact, they were often interwoven with concepts of a divine order or a prime mover. For them, reason was a divine gift, a tool to comprehend the world the gods had created. There was no conflict, only a shared quest for truth. Then came the rise of the great monotheistic religions. Early Christian theologians like Augustine of Hippo masterfully integrated Greek philosophy with Christian doctrine. Augustine, deeply influenced by Plato, famously said, "I believe in order to understand." For him, faith was the starting point, the foundation upon which the house of reason could be built. Faith provided the ultimate truths, and reason was the method to explore their depths and implications. It was a beautiful synergy. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and we meet towering figures like Thomas Aquinas. He took the rediscovered works of Aristotle and synthesized them with Christian theology in a monumental way. Aquinas argued that reason and faith could not truly contradict each other because both ultimately originated from God, the source of all truth. He distinguished between truths known through natural reason, like the existence of a first cause, and truths known through divine revelation, like the Holy Trinity. They were different paths, but they both led up to the same mountain peak. This harmonious view dominated Western thought for centuries, but then the ground began to shift. The Renaissance sparked a renewed focus on human potential in the natural world. This was followed by the Scientific Revolution, a period that would forever change how we see the universe. Figures like Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton introduced a new way of knowing, the scientific method. Through observation, experimentation, and mathematics, they unveiled a cosmos governed by predictable natural laws. This was a game changer. Galileo's astronomical observations challenged the long-held geocentric model of the universe, which was supported by the Church. This led to his infamous conflict with the Inquisition. While the Galileo affair is often painted as a simple clash between science and religion, the reality was far more complex, involving politics, personality, and theological interpretation. However, it became a powerful symbol of a growing tension. Suddenly, it seemed there were two competing authorities on truth: the ancient scriptures and the new book of nature. Written in the language of mathematics, the Enlightenment in the 18th century took this even further. Philosophers like Voltaire and David Hume championed human reason as the ultimate arbiter of truth. Casting a skeptical eye on tradition, revelation, and religious institutions, they argued that beliefs should be based on evidence and logic alone, not on blind faith. For many Enlightenment thinkers, reason was no longer a partner to faith, but its judge. This period is often called the Age of Reason, and it laid the intellectual foundations for the modern secular world. The 19th century brought even more dramatic developments. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection provided a purely naturalistic explanation for the diversity of life, challenging the traditional biblical account of creation. This was a seismic shock. For the first time, a core tenet of religious belief seemed to be directly contradicted by a powerful scientific theory. The debate that erupted was fierce and in many ways continues to this day. It solidified the conflict model in the public imagination, the idea that science and faith are locked in a perpetual war. So where does that leave us today? The relationship between faith and reason is more diverse and nuanced than ever. Many scientists are people of faith and see no conflict between their work and their beliefs. They might view science as the study of how the universe works, and faith as the exploration of why it exists and what our purpose is within it. Theologians and philosophers continue to grapple with these questions, posing new ways to integrate scientific discoveries with spiritual traditions. Some see God acting through the natural laws that science uncovers. At the same time, the perception of conflict remains strong in popular culture. Some religious fundamentalists reject established scientific findings, while some prominent atheists argue that science has made religious belief obsolete. This loud, polarized debate often drowns out the quieter, more complex conversations happening in the middle. The story of faith and reason is not a simple tale of one replacing the other. It's a dynamic, evolving dialogue. It's about humanity's enduring quest to make sense of existence using all the tools at our disposal: our hearts and our minds, our spiritual intuitions, and our empirical observations. It's a journey from synergy to conflict, and now, perhaps, to a new, more mature understanding. A recognition that faith and reason ask different kinds of questions, and that maybe, just maybe, we need both to paint a complete picture of our world. What do you think? Is the conflict real, or is it a misunderstanding? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this journey through history interesting, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world. See you next time.